When I look at you, God, and only God is what I see. When I look at you, God, and only God is what I see. Oh,
Wow. Oh, everybody just take a slow, deep breath after that. That was amazing. That was absolutely amazing. Thank you, Rudy. Well, the title of my talk today is Living Your Purpose. And I'll get to what that has to do with Father's Day in just a second. But today we celebrate Father's Day. We celebrate and acknowledge those dads in our life. And I think it's important to recognize that not every man is a father or even wanted to be one. But I think most men and some women have fulfilled that role in someone's life. It's a very important role where they've come in and they've stepped into that dad role, if you will, where they were the mentor, the teacher, that father figure that was made an impression on someone. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that. Whether we want to admit it, we all had a dad at some point in time. Good or bad, we all had a dad or a father. Now, some of us had great dads. Some of us had those, you think of Leave It to Beaver with Ward Cleaver. I'm dating myself, I know, but that's okay. And some of us, remember Father Knows Best? Robert Young played Jim Anderson, the insurance salesman, and he came home every day at 5 o'clock and hung the hat up, and he, kissed his wife on the cheek and he asked the kids, "How was your day?" And that's a great father figure to look towards. We didn't all have that. We didn't all have that. Some of us didn't have dads that were great. Some of us had dads that were so-so. Some of us had dads that we never knew, never had a chance to meet our fathers. Some of us had dads that were gone a lot. They were, absent. My dad was home for most of my formative years every other weekend. That's when we saw Dad, because he traveled for a living, and we only saw him on weekends. And I was a daddy's girl. So on those weekends, I loved it when my dad got home. So some of us, we didn't have those father figures, but we learned lessons from those experiences with our fathers, whether they were great, whether they weren't, whether we never had one. We still learned lessons from that, and we benefited from those lessons, and that's where we are today, is we benefited from those lessons and the things that went on. And I think my dad was pretty good. As dads go, I think my dad probably was a pretty good dad. He was a very funny guy. My dad taught me every practical joke I've ever learned in my life that I have repeated multiple times. My dad taught me how to short sheet a bed better than anybody in the world. And every time I used to visit my mom before I left, I always short sheeted the bed on the guest bed. And invariably, my aunt would be the next one that would come to visit. And she was a very tall woman, and she'd get in the bed, and I'd get a phone call at like 10 o'clock at night, Houston time. Thank God San Diego was less. Well, I won't say what she said. But my father had a great sense of humor. He was also very, very strict. He was very strict. He was very controlling, and he had a very quick, hot Irish temper. And we got to be the brunt of that sometimes, too. Most of the times because we deserved it. But my father also had a memory like a steel trap. He was very quick on his feet, very quick mind, but he had this memory that was just incomparable. We'd be in a group of people, and he would have met you one time, and he'd go up and address you by name, and he'd remember something about the person. He never met a stranger. Megan only met my dad a few times, but she reminds me of my dad because she remembers people, and she'll go up to anybody and say hi, and that was my dad. He had 5 kids. He could never remember our names, but he remembered this guy's grandson. Just amazed me. But he was a salesman his whole life, so that was something that was built into him as a tool because it made his clients feel so important when he remembered things. So it was really kind of a cool thing for Dad to have. Now, I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and admittedly, our parents had different roles at that time than they do today. And, when I was growing up, if you'd had a stay-at-home dad in the neighborhood, you can be guaranteed that somebody was calling him the lazy bum on the corner who can't keep a job. right? Even though he was staying home, performing a very important job as a stay-at-home dad. Our parents just had very different roles in those days because that's the way society was. And as a result of that, let's face it, it was very gender specific in those days. You had your man's responsibilities and chores and the women's responsibilities and chores. My dad, because he wasn't home all the time, one of the things that he told me when I was growing up was, my job is to make sure you find your purpose in life. My job is to make sure you find your purpose in life because, by golly, everybody has one. And you will find out what your purpose in life is. And he even told me, and it's going to sometime along the way be different. It will change. So be ready for it. And that's about all he told me at that point in time was, you got to expect that. Now, in the Bible, in Jeremiah 29:11, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." So when I think of my dad in that voice in my head saying, you have a purpose in life, you're here for a reason, I think of this. This was a very easy Bible quote for me to come by because it really expresses what my dad said. Plans to give you hope and a future. That's what he had in mind with that. Now, I believe that our purpose in life is to deliver our authentic self. Every day, in every way, to be authentic and deliver that part of us. That makes us unique and individual. That makes our purposes unique and individual. And in the discovery process of that purpose, we discover God. In that discovery, we discover God, that God's in everything and everyone. In the delivery process, in expressing ourselves, expressing our purpose, we deliver the God-like essence that is unique to each of us. Now, Connie, Megan, and I lived in San Diego for years, and when Megan was a baby, we lived in these townhouses, and our next-door neighbors moved in, and they were delightful people, Mike and Chris. And Megan was like 14 months old at the time, and she's a little older than that now. If I give her age, she'll beat me up on the way home. But Megan, we knew these people, and still, Chris is still with us, and we still stay in touch. Mike and Chris were very good friends, and they moved around a lot. When they came back to the California area, Mike was very sick. And he was on his way to exit stage left. And we talked. And Mike knew that I was a minister, and he said, I want you to do my memorial service. And they were about a 45-minute drive away, and I said, okay. He said, come visit me. So I would go up after work and on weekends and go visit Mike, and we talked about life, and we talked about what he did with his life, and things he was proud of, and things he was regretting. And we had wonderful conversations, and Chris was there with us, and Chris was wonderful. She always made sure I had something to eat or drink when I was there. She was always taking care of Mike. She was a caregiver. At one point in time, we were homeless. We were between homes. Escrow had closed on one and not on the other, right? And we went and lived with them for a month. It was just, yeah, come on, we have a guest room. And the three of us lived in that room together for a month. But when I was there visiting with Mike and Chris, Mike had told me what he wanted. And Mike ultimately passed, made his transition, and we had a beautiful memorial service. And after that, I went to visit Chris, and she said, I know everybody's here for a reason, but I feel like my reason's gone. Because Mike's gone. And we've all had that loss in our lives where someone's gone, they've made their transition, and they've passed on. And we were so tied to them, we were so entwined, that when they're gone, we're kind of left with this empty feeling. And I talked to Chris, and I let her talk and listen very carefully. And it dawned on me that Chris's purpose in life had never been Mike. Mike was a recipient of her purpose in life. She was a caregiver. She was someone who nurtured others. And Mike was a recipient. And I let her know, I said, you haven't lost your purpose in life. It's changed now. Mike was the person who got to benefit from it most by virtue of your long relationship and your loving relationship that you had. But you didn't lose your purpose. It's still here. And she now her son lives with her and his new wife. And while she's gotten a little more decrepit as all of us do. She can't do everything, but she still does nurture and take care of others in her life. So her purpose changed, but it didn't go away. It changed and it morphed as time went by. And I had to remind her of that. I had to remind her that her purpose was not Mike. And I still talk to Chris at least once a month now, and it's been since 1982. So we've had a long, long relationship. But Chris is very important, and I reminded her how important she is. And it's important for us to remember how important we all are. My dad did. My dad reminds me all the time that I was here for a purpose, and that purpose was important. Now, ladies, I apologize. I'm going to go into a little bit of a sports analogy here, but it's Father's Day, so I'm going to take some creative license here. When I was growing up, I was an avid softball player. I played softball from the time I was probably 8 or 9 years old up even into a year in college. And I loved playing softball. My dad knew that. He never got a chance to come see me play, but he knew how much I loved the game. And he said, you have an important purpose on that team, and that's to support the team. That's your purpose when you're playing ball. So no matter what supporting role you may have. Now, I wasn't a first baseman or a pitcher, one of those really prestige positions. I was kind of a utility player. I could play 4 or 5 different positions well. And I couldn't knock the ball over the fence when I got up to bat, but I could place hit the ball, and I was a really fast runner. So when I played ball, I was the one that would make the sacrifice hit. I'd hit the ball just over the infield, over to right field, so the runners on second and third could possibly score. Now, they'd throw me out. My dad said, "That's okay. Do you know what you just did? You allowed them to score." So that was important. And when I played outfield, he'd say, "You don't need to throw the runner out. You need to get the ball to the person who can make the out." So he reminded me, supporting roles are very important on your purpose. And those values carried with me throughout my life. Every one of those. As I got older, I tried to figure out, do I need to define my purpose? Is defining my purpose important? And I really kind of hesitate to say define. Because to me, when you define something, you make it very concrete. Right? I can define what a chair is. And it's going to stay the shape of a chair. It might change a little color, whatever, but it's going to be very specific. If you define your purpose, my concern is, are you putting limitations on it? When you define your purpose, do you limit what it is? Do you confine it instead of defining it? So when you're thinking about what your purpose is and how you live your purpose, allow there to be soft gray edges that'll change as you need to, that can, like tentacles that come out. Because defining it and putting it into one small box, that's like saying define God. Well, if I try and define God, boy, I'm putting some limitations, aren't I? I used to do a thing with my youth church, define God. Can you put God in a square box? No. Why? Because God's too big. So if you try to define your purpose, you're making your purpose very small. Allow it to be like God, ever flowing, ever moving. Now, some of us had very important people in our lives. They may or may not have been our dad, but they were people who made an impression on us. It might have been your dad. It might have been a father figure. It might have been a teacher or a family friend or a neighbor. And when you think back upon those people, I think you can remember things that they did that impressed you, things that they did that moved you. They were living their purpose, and you benefited from it. You got a chance to do that. Now, when I'm thinking about my purpose, and sometimes it's challenging, sometimes I'll make a valiant effort to live my purpose, and then all of a sudden it's like, bam, you got kind of get hit on the side of the head, right? And I sit there going, really? Right now? God, really? Right now? Why? Why right now are you trying to give me a lesson? I'm not ready for it right now. It kind of reminds me, anybody ever see the movie Oh God with George Burns and John Denver? I loved the movie. I absolutely loved that movie. And sometimes when I ask these questions, God, why right now? It reminds me of that movie. There's a point in the movie where John Denver says to George Burns, who portrays the character God in the movie, he says, "Hey God, why do you permit suffering in the world?" And God replies back, "I don't permit suffering, you do. Remember? Free will. Free will, you've got your choice. You make your choices. Those choices are yours. And, throughout that movie, I laughed at all these quips, but that's one of those movies you laugh and go, oh, wait a minute. That's funny, but it's not so funny because it's so true. It's so true because that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing every single time. So the purpose, does your purpose ever change? Oh gosh, I sure hope so. I know that my purpose in life has shifted with the tides, depending upon what I'm doing. My purpose, let's face it, this little one sitting in Mama's arms right now has a purpose, right? And it's a little girl, right? As she grows up, she's going to have her purposes change, just like ours did. My purpose as a kid playing softball was certainly different when I got my teenage years. And my purpose when I went from being a teenager and joined the Navy, my purpose definitely changed. My purpose in life certainly changed when Megan came into our lives. Your purpose changes, and you can have multiple purposes, if you will. And I say that because if you're working, you have a purpose in your job that might be separate from your personal life. When you retire, that purpose goes away. And then, if you're not careful, sometimes you're going, I don't have a purpose anymore, because you retire. Connie and I have talked about this, both of us, when we retired. You retire on Monday, and on Tuesday, it's like, whoa, nobody needs me today. Nobody's calling me. Nobody's asking me questions. What happened? But you've got to realize your purpose is now changing. That's one of those times when it's shifting, and you need to be willing and open to acknowledge that and shift with it. And like my dad said, always told me, you have a purpose, find it, and it's going to change. You're going to have to be able to know when to change with that. In God's eyes, we're always perfect. Our purpose is always perfect. In God's eyes, we're the star of the show. Anybody ever think about that? In God's eyes, we are the stars of the show. That's exactly what God looks at us and says. You're the star of the show. So there are times when we sit there and want to compare ourselves to others. And that's such a futile exercise. Because how can I be Candace? I can't be Candace. I'm Kathy. I'll never be a Candace because I'm always going to be Kathy. And I'm going to be the best Kathy I can be, and Candace is going to be the best Candace she can be. And to try and do anything other than that is crazy, because there is no point of comparison. That's why God put us here, to be unique and different. And I don't have to compare myself to anybody or try and be somebody else, because that wasn't what God made me for. God said, hey, this is the way it's going to be. Get ready for it. I'm reading a wonderful book by Reverend Linda Martella Whitsitt. It's called Divine Audacity. If you ever have an opportunity, it's a wonderful book. She says this: Jesus emphasizes his purpose is to display visible evidence of the invisible Father or Source while living humanly. I love that quote. When I saw that, I went, I've got to put this in a talk somewhere. And this just happened to be the perfect one. We follow the teachings of the master teacher Jesus. We try and emulate his life and live as he lived. So we should be emphasizing that our purpose is to display visible evidence of our invisible source as we live humanly. When I was practicing my talk, I kept saying humanely, and I don't think that was an accident. While we live humanely and humanly, we display the visible evidence of an invisible Father. That's what we're all about, truly. So what's next? How do we live our purpose? I mean, that's the title of my talk, right? Living our purpose. So my dad said I was here to do. This is Father's Day. As a daddy's girl, I have to always respect what my father did for me when I was a kid, all growing up. How do we live our purpose? To me, it's actually pretty simple. And I know that that's easy to say, but it is pretty simple. How do we live our purpose? Acknowledge that you have one. Acknowledge that you have a purpose for being here on earth. You had a purpose from the moment you were born, and you will have purpose to the moment you take your last breath. And every breath in between, there is purpose behind it. Acknowledge that you are a creation of a divine mind. You are a child of God. You were put here by divine appointment. Every single one of us was put on this earth by divine appointment. And each of us must have an important role to play because God's the one that put us here. And I'm not about to argue with God. I don't know about you. But we are here by divine appointment. I love Ralph Waldo Emerson. He said this, "To know that even one life has breathed easier because you have lived, that is to have succeeded." Now, I think that when I read this, I think that every person I've ever met was living their purpose because someone breathed easier as a result of it. Each person in this room right now, each of you has succeeded. Each of you has succeeded. Because when you come here and support me, when you come here to be in fellowship with one another, we've all breathed easier. When I see smiling faces looking out at you when I come to speak, I breathe easier. You have succeeded. Your purpose is met right here and now, and it continues to be met. Every time you smile, every time you greet someone, your purpose is met. You have succeeded. Pericles, famous Greek authoritarian figure, soldier, said, "What you leave behind is what is engraved in stone monuments." Not in stone monuments, excuse me, start over. What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others. So it begs the question, what are we weaving today? What is it you want to weave into the lives of others? What is it we want to do with our lives, with our purpose? You know, we have the power to change the direction of our lives because we have the power of thought. And every new thought becomes a new thing in our lives, right? That's part of what we believe. Our thoughts are prayers. We are always praying. Our thoughts or prayers take charge of what you're saying. Seek a higher consciousness, the source of peacefulness, and know that God is always there. So what is it that we're weaving today? What is it that we're aiming for? For me, it's the truth that I seek, and I keep seeking. Truth with a capital T. That's what we're looking for. That's what we're doing. So what are we weaving into our lives today? And you know, some of us are going to do this very slowly when we weave our lives into others. Some of us are taking baby steps. We're introverts. You got extroverts and introverts. We know that Reverend Gary is an extrovert, right? He's out there all the time. He's a big personality. And then we've got introverts, people who are very content to kind of sit back a little bit and watch and contemplate and think. I like to think I'm somewhere in between, depending upon the circumstance. But if you're an introvert, how do you live your purpose? How do you go out there and allow God through you to express? Because it's kind of hard as an introvert to walk up to a stranger and say, "Hi, how you doing today?" This is what I would encourage you to do. If you're introverted, next time you're walking into like HEB and people are coming towards you as they're exiting, just smile and say good morning. That's a lot of an effort for some people who are very introverted to do that. Work your way up to when you're checking out. Talk to the bagger. I've got my favorite gal at HEB, Sarah. I always talk to Sarah. "Sarah, how's your day going today?" I can't necessarily do that to everybody, but I know Sarah and I'm very comfortable. Another checkers woman, Dorothy. "Dorothy, how's it going?" Yeah, it's Candace and I go to the same HEB. And Dorothy's one of those people, you look at her up front and she's like, ugh. I got a lady at my doctor's office. First time I met her, I thought, oh, there's no warm fuzzy here, and no amount of trying to be an extrovert is going to win her over. We're actually very good friends now, and we've kind of cracked that veneer, and she's delightful. But if you're introverted, just try and take baby steps, because your purpose has to come out. Your purpose has to come out and be expressed. And you're going to do it uniquely, and you're going to do it whatever way is best for you. And it's going to be something that's easier and easier as time goes by. Now, I can't tell you what your purpose in life is any more than I can tell you what you're going to have for breakfast tomorrow. Unless you come to my house, and then I probably still don't know what you're going to have for breakfast tomorrow. But I do know that you do know your purpose. You know your purpose by just being here today. Because you are seekers of truth. Because you have a deeper knowledge and wisdom than you're willing to know and admit. And those of you that do know it and do admit it, let it out. Let it out. Let everyone see what that purpose is. Let everyone feel that purpose as they encounter you. But know that the purpose is going to change just as you change. I know that my purpose in life now certainly is not what it was last year or the year before. But I'm willing to admit and to acknowledge that it's there, and I'm going to be going forward with it. So I think back of all the lessons that my father taught me. And I want you to think about the lessons your fathers might have taught you. And if you didn't know your father, who that person in your life was that might have been the person that taught you those lessons. And it doesn't have to be a man, it can be a woman. Megan grew up with 2 moms. So there are different lessons, dad-type lessons that we had to kind of teach her along the way. And we were lucky enough to have people like Mike that I referred to earlier, and some other young men in our lives that were able to step in and do things that dads would do. And I think all of us have had those people in our life, those dad figures, that taught us those lessons along the way. My dad's lesson to me was live your purpose. And I hope that you will take that to heart and do that as well. For our personal exploration this week, be willing to accept God's presence in you as your purpose. We are all children of God. We're here by divine appointment. Be willing to accept that God's presence in you is part and parcel of your purpose. Express your purpose freely and fully. And be flexible as your purpose shifts and morphs into something new and different. Just be willing to remember to live your purpose. I love you. I thank you. Namaste. Thank you.